Welcome. This is SessionWell. Happy Thursday evening. My name is Adam Luke. This is
Judy Ann.
And we are SessionWell. So what's SessionWell? It is a podcast developed for pre-licensed and licensed clinicians and the average Joe. So if you're out there wondering, what type of therapy interventions, what type of therapy information is out there in the world, we try to bring that to you through the lens of what we do every day. So we have
thank you guys for joining us. This happens every week not last week because we were on spring break. But thanks to my brother, Freddie Ann and Kara Studios. If you ever are looking for web design or promo videos or client lead generation, you can always contact him for this. So thank you, Freddie.
Now we get to talk about our badass guest.
Yes. You might recognize his face from when he was on here with Jeff Ortiz, but this time he gets the platform by himself.
Yes, it was the hour of power. We needed just him. So who are you?
Who am I? So my name is Jorge Garcia. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. Currently work as a TBS supervisor, support counselor supervisor. A company called Starview. I work at Renovari in private practice. And still in school. I'm one of the crazy people who went to school after he graduated.
Yes.
Because you want to be a doctor. Dr.
Because
Garcia.
I want to be a doctor.
Yes.
I want that title.
It's going to be awesome. No, the other cool piece of information is, you've been all over multiple counties today, haven't you?
I have. I was in Torrance, Long Beach, Orange County now.
There's a lot of driving.
Yes, a lot of driving, but I'm sure that's what you're doing with your community-based mental health stuff.
Yeah. For the most part, I'm in the office now in Torrance, but I do a little bit of field work with intakes, but nothing like it was before. Yeah.
Awesome.
But it's still in an hour, 15-minute drive out here,
Yeah.
which is totally worth it for when I do come out here. So.
Well, thanks for joining us. Oh, go ahead.
No, it's all good. I also, because we have a big pre-license following, so how long ago did you get your license?
So I got licensed last May.
Crazy thing, we went to school together, and George, and we were in the same cohort.
Yes,
so he was
I graduated before all of you. But you're all going to get licensed before me, but that's okay.
That's not true, Judy. We're still on the same track. But no, I just always found George killed it. He got out of... So that's the other side that always blown me away. You got out of school, you started just nailing it with your hours, and then you're like, this is too easy, I'm going back to school. So, I think that's enough talking him up. So, but this evening though, we've got a really cool topic. And cool because it's not talked about.
At all.
And we're going to throw more light on it. And I appreciate you coming here to have that conversation. So what are we talking about this evening?
Yeah, so the title that actually Judy helped me come up with, I think.
Oh, I did? Oh, okay.
I
think I just asked you, what would your title like to be? And then you came up with it, and I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, threw out some ideas, and you were like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So we titled it The Invisible Man. And so that was really kind of birthed out of this idea that oftentimes society offers this false definition of what it means to be a man. And in order to be considered masculine, this is what you have to do. And essentially, if you chop that down and break it down very specifically, essentially what you have to do is really deny core pieces of who you are, and deny your own personhood, which is more damaging than anything and complete opposite, I think, of what it actually entails to be a man. And so in light of that specifically, looking at, in honor of Infertility Awareness Week, infertility, but from the male experience of infertility.
So because obviously I'm not a man, what do you feel like are core pieces of being a man that has to be hidden that you guys get from society?
I would say, the first thing that comes to mind, anything emotional, any feelings, you have to shut that off. You have to be strong, so denying those feelings. If there's a problem, you have to fix it. And if you can't, then just work harder and figure it out.
Yeah, stuff whatever's the problem, but work harder, and then it's really, I think the space that society makes for many males is just like a consumer-based space. So you have to consume a lot. You have to be, either have to make the most money, you have to have the biggest house or the best car. Your wife or significant other has to have the best of everything as well. Otherwise, you're not able to provide as a male. And then so a little backstory you didn't know is George and I were talking last night over text a little bit about this idea of what this podcast was going to be like. It was also the idea of like to be a man, you have to be this this sexual god in some way, right? Like if you're not pleasing your woman, you're not a man. And then I think there comes a lot to procreation as well. You know, if you're a man that doesn't have sons, you're not a man. And I'm not saying that I back that. I'm just saying that that's definitely out there, right? I have a really good friend that he had 2 daughters and then he had a son. And before he had his son, it was always like, so when are you going to try for another? And he's like, well, I really like my daughters.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, but when are you going to have your boy?
Yeah. I mean, like in Asian culture, that's how it is. Like they will like, you know, like my mom has always told us, like, you know, you make sure you have a boy first. And it's like, well, can I just have a baby? Like, you know, and I know that like my brother, I don't know if he feels the pressure, but I know that he is essentially the last yen of our like family. And so the pressure is kind of a little bit on him in order to kind of have kids and pass on our family name and what would happen if he didn't. And so I don't know if those are kind of the pressures that all men face, but like you said, like this is the Fertility Awareness Week, and so we have heard from Anna and from other people where infertility tends to be a female issue, and I'll be honest, like that's all I know it from is just girlfriends that I've had and just that fear of just being a woman and not being able to provide and have kids. So I don't know what it's like from like a male perspective, and so how does that tie in with the title of The Invisible Man?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in going through this experience, I've experienced a lot. If I had to describe what this experience has been like, the things that come to mind is just tremendous, unequivocal confusion and relentless shame and guilt. And kind of what we were saying before, you know, if there's a problem, you got to fix it. And so being in a situation where you literally have no control and there's almost nothing you can do to fix it.
Yeah.
And then that's where all the guilt and all the shame and stuff comes in. And even after trying to find support for it, you know, like almost all treatments, verbiage, books, support groups are all oriented towards females. And even the rare times where it may start with the male, it eventually finds itself towards the female. And I think even Anna alluded to it, where her own husband was completely ignored at one point, and the focus was solely on her. And I've had doctors tell me, well, we can't work with you because you're a man. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And so then you're like kind of left with no options. At that point.
The way you said that just like hit a rock for me of like, for someone to say, I can't work with you because you're a man, like I can't change that.
Yeah.
So what, there's nothing out there for me.
Right. Yeah, and it can feel so isolating. And almost to the point where it feels like that's the only option that we have. And we can't share anything because either they can't work with us because we're male, or the language is written and geared towards females, so it doesn't directly apply to us. Or if you're reading a book that is geared towards females, and it's almost like, well, I can't let anybody read this, so I'm gonna kind of hide. I'll read it like in my closet when nobody's around. And I mean, if you think of shame, like shame just festers and grows in isolation. And so that's one of the what has been one of the hardest things I think for me in kind of going through this journey, is to avoid that temptation to isolate myself.
And so what has brought you to, I mean, like we talked about this a little bit before, like what brought you then to come on this podcast to basically talk about it openly and not to be invisible?
Yeah, so a lot of encouragement from friends, from my wife. So I have become so passionate about this topic and men who experience this, that I want to use my platform of therapy and education to provide an outlet of support for them. And so one, it was to raise awareness of that this is so grossly underserved when it comes to men, that it's not just a female issue. It's not really even a gender issue. It's just a human issue.
Right.
And then I think thirdly, really, in part of my own healing process from this, coming on and sitting with people that I know, being in a safe place and talking about it, and just even sitting with people who are not necessarily on the journey themselves, but just that companionship to know, okay, I'm not on this path alone, can provide so much healing, and I think really be the catalyst to step out and provide that support for other men who may be at different places on their journey.
So I'm a person that I love to work out of the attachment modality, right? So then when you bring the invisible male, invisible man here, I go, okay, have you had conversations with other males that may be in the same circumstance? What does that moment look like when the world changes? You know? Yeah,
that's a great question. So I actually have not found any other men on the journey that I've shared with, or at least that have opened up about it to me. So it's always been just very few friends here and there who I've kind of shared with. I joined some online like Facebook groups. One, ironically, was only the only people using it was women. So I'm like, well, I'm not gonna go on there. And so today, actually, for the first time, I did post something, just letting people like, hey, I'm new to this group, but this is kind of where I'm at. And I've had people respond throughout the day, and again, it's just that companionship of knowing I'm not alone on the path, and that has been very refreshing and very healing, I think, for me. But yeah, no face-to-face contacts yet. Hopefully that would change. But so you talk about advocating for the sense of more information, more resources. So this isn't something that I've ever Googled, but I imagine when you sit back and you're wrestling with this and you go, okay, I want to find information. What was popping up for you when you were looking, and there's nothing there? Yeah, a lot of nothing. Yeah. Which doesn't help at all, right? Oh, yeah, no, just the shadow gets bigger and bigger.
Come on, Google.
Yeah, you're like,
Google knows everything.
When it's only got,
I know,
you type that in, it's got one O, and you're like, what the hell? Yeah. Like, we have one page. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And it's just like definitions, maybe some statistics. Wow. But I didn't find a lot of like books. I was looking for books. I was looking for support groups. Even like podcasts. And every podcast that I found online was just, again, female oriented, or only female guests or female host. So there was one podcast I did find, and it was a doctor who was talking more about the medical aspect of it. Okay. So very informative, but not quite what I was looking for at the time. And so even that is just very debilitating when, in that process of like, okay, I need support. I know I need it. I don't know where to go. And so I'm going to do what society has kind of reinforced to me, and what I have kind of reinforced with myself, and I'm just going to hide it. And I'm just going to muster through it. So I'll perform really well at work. I'll get really good grades.
I'll see all my clients and practice in agency, and I'll just be the best I can be in everything else, and just hopefully all that will just cover this
trickle
topic.
down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So who have you been turned? I mean, like, has family, your wife, like friends, like, has that been helpful in this journey, or has that? Not saying that it's not enough, but like, what has gotten you here? I guess, like through your healing process.
Yeah. So, ironically, I have not had many conversations with my family about it. It's just kind of up there, like, they know I go to a doctor, they know that, this issue, they've heard it, but it's never really talked about.
Yeah.
And, it might be uncomfortable for them to ask me, they don't know how I'm going to respond. But I think one of the biggest things that helped me get to this point, because if this was a year ago, like, hell no, I would not be sitting here.
Yeah.
But getting into therapy and really talking about that and having someone kind of hold that space for me and say it's okay, you can feel whatever you feel, and help me process a lot of my thoughts, because I stay in my head a lot.
Yeah.
I read a lot.
Yeah.
I will think and hear off conversations, and it never comes out here.
Oh no.
And that can be a tough thing to just stay in your head. And so therapy really forced me to get my ideas out of my head.
Yeah.
And look at them a new way, and really interact with my grief in a different way, and take the meaning that I had ascribed to this part of my life and rewrite it to something that was more meaningful and beneficial to me. So that's probably been one of the biggest things that has really helped. Part of what my therapist had challenged me with was to let people in on this kind of part of my life. And so obviously the closest person to me is my wife, and I was not very good at letting her in on this part. It was just everything was hidden, and so when I started doing that, there were moments where I felt true acceptance in the midst of this. One of the most impactful things that she had told me was, whether we have kids or not, like, I am so fully content with where we're at. And for me, that just made a huge impact on me, because for the longest time I was like, well, no, like, she's not content because I'm failing her, and I can't do anything to fix it, and so I'm not a good husband, and I'm not a good man. And when she said that, it just, like, debunked everything instantly.
It's like the ultimate reality test, right?
Yeah.
Like because that narrative, like, all of a sudden the weight behind it sort of changes.
Yeah. And even in that process, it's not just me letting her in on my grief. She's letting me in on her grief and what the experience is like for her.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of a reciprocity where we both get to nourish each other through that journey. And I think that's also something that I'm really hoping to use, both therapy and education, to bring to other men, is bring that sense of companionship to where they can allow other men to look at the parts that hurt in their life and to speak into them and empower them to step and walk in their divinity, in their personhood, and really become who they were meant to be. So long answer to that.
No, well, thank you for sharing. So you had mentioned the fact that, like, going through therapy, you've had to go through healing of your own grief. Did you know that's what it was? Like, did you know you were on a journey of grieving?
I think so. I think for so long. So I'm reading a book right now by Terry Real. It's called I Don't Want to Talk About It. And so
I love that book.
specifically on male depression. It's phenomenal so far. And so he talks about two types of depression. There's the overt depression, which everybody can spot a mile away. It's like a cop on the freeway. Like, you know where they're at.
Yeah.
And then there's the covert depression, where it's the $1 million CEO who's working 80 hours a week,
Yeah.
you know, and is totally disconnected from his family. And I think for the longest time I was at that covert level. And so I think the grief had always been there, but I just filled it with other stuff that I was able to control and excel in. And it wasn't until I had a moment where we actually found out about a baby announcement, and it was someone really close to us, and it just hit me like a rock. And so then I'm feeling that grief, and then I'm feeling shame for feeling grief for that. And it's like, okay, I can't even be here. So I left and went to the gym, did that whole thing, and it's like, yeah, I think I need help. I think I need somebody to kind of help me process all this. You know, and then the grief, you know, is fluid and complex and changes all the time. So even in therapy, the grief was constantly changing, and even now, it's, you know, I'm in a whole different place, but the grief still changes. And you know, but now I get to choose how I interact with it versus it choosing for me.
And I think it's really important when you identify that covert depression, because I'll out you and me at the same time. I would consider us both very successful at what we do in the ages that we are, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so what throws people off though is when someone meets you up off the street or at a networking event or whatever and talks about everything that you've accomplished, but underneath they don't understand that there is depression still. Like covert depression is something I've had to deal with since I graduated my master's program, because of the fact that I could always keep myself busy and keep sort of like checking off the check boxes that everyone else was striving to get. And so I was able to hide my own dissatisfaction with life through just beating people to their own goals, but not actually achieving any of my own goals, right? So, like, it's pretty much the male condition to some point, because we just bury ourselves in our work or whatever we're good at, and we think that will bring us happiness, all while we're just working so hard so we don't focus on what we're unhappy about.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the checklist, because that's very much how I operate. It's like, you know, I remember back in college, so I went to Biola, which is, you know, not an inexpensive school, and, you know, I was raised by my grandparents, and so asking my grandma for $30,000 for tuition was like, okay, that's probably not going to happen. So I got to make this work because I want to go here. And it was like, okay, so I need to attend every single financial aid workshop. I need to talk to the financial aid counselors. I need to talk to my counselor. Like, I made a whole checklist, and I made that happen. And it, you know, for the longest time, that was kind of like my MO. Like, I'll find a way to do it. Fertility doesn't work that way.
No.
There is no checklist that I've been able to come up with that fixes the biological component and also speaks to the emotional and relational component of it as well, which can be challenging for men who are conditioned in this society.
I mean, I'm going to speak frank here, but for most teenage boys, they're immediately afraid of getting their girlfriend pregnant. But we don't talk about male infertility, right? So I think that's also some of the sticker shock, having friends who have this same condition. Because they're like, dude, I spent 8 years, 9 years of my life thinking I could get a woman pregnant, and that's why I'm so dumbfounded to be on this other end and be like, why is it working? Why isn't it working? But we don't talk about it because we stigmatize it, right? We just talk about the aunts and uncles that don't have kids. You know, oh yeah, they just never wanted kids or whatever. We don't ever actually get into their story or provide them the space. I think that was an important thing that you brought up, is the fact that not everyone is safe, and I especially mean that when we talk about family. And that can throw people off. No, family's supposed to be the safest place. Maybe you are blessed with having that family, that they are a safe place. Maybe you're not.
It's interesting because when you guys talk, like, as a female, like, my first thought is, well, don't you guys just like find each other and like sit in a room and like talk about all these things? Because like my first thought is, if I find out later that I can't have kids, the first thought I'm like, okay, I'm gonna text my mom, ask her for. I mean, I'm talking to my husband at the time, yes, and then I'm gonna ask my friend Heather and Jamie and my mom and my sister, and I'm just gonna sit in a room with them and cry it out and tell me all about it and like help support me. And so I imagine that's not how it works for you guys. But like, how come? Like, how come you guys can't get together and like discuss these things? Like, what is holding back men from being able to do that?
You want to run point or you want me? Which one?
Go, I'll follow your lead.
Okay, so
set me up.
I think the reason why men don't sit around and share emotions in this way or talk about failures in life is because other men are as equally scared of failure. So if I sat with him and he's just talking to me about a job, oh, he lost his job. I don't really want to talk about that because I'm worried about me losing my job. Maybe it's just this fact of that I think a lot of men, we don't talk about these issues because they're so uncomfortable, and we're not given the space in society as young men to even practice the skill. And so if I would hope, having known George for a longer time, having gone through training to be a clinician, I would hope that if he came to me before this podcast and had relayed this information, that I wouldn't have tried to fix in that moment. But I'll be honest with you, I kind of already know I would have been super uncomfortable, and I'm sorry, but that's because we don't talk about this. And so as much as we want to be present and talk about these things, we're not really given the space, because most of the time, if you do, it's very easy to hear the locker room talk of like, that guy's always bitching about his problems, or very crude things, right? I don't know, that's how I see it from this side. Maybe you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think topics like infertility or just distress and pain in general is so uncomfortable, and in general is taboo, and you can think of it as like levels of taboo. And there's like, infertility is something that's really taboo, especially for men, and it's because it's not talked about. It makes people very uncomfortable, which makes the person suffering or going through it feel uncomfortable and feel like they have to hide. I think another thing for me that kind of came up was, and this actually came up a lot in my own personal therapy, was feeling like I need to be the superhero and save everybody else. And so one of the most crippling things that I was faced with was failing as a Superman or superhero. Because again, there's literally nothing that I could do to fix any part of this. And I had to be completely reliant on other people, doctors or my therapist or family, and that was very uncomfortable, and really just disorienting for a long time. And so I think the combination of those two things make it difficult for men to kind of get together and talk.
Do you feel like there's a difference between you talking to a female versus a male about this topic, or just in general when you guys are feeling pain?
Yeah, I think it depends on what end I'm at. So if I'm on the end again where I'm the helping or the listener, either or is fine. Male, female, dog, cat, don't matter.
We love the dogs.
Yeah, Mochi, Zoe, Roxy. Can't remember the other dogs. Diesel, that's what it is. Yeah, Diesel. But if I'm on the other side of it, I think it would be harder for me to discuss it probably with the female, because I think just the gender difference gives an illusion of disconnect, whether it's an illusion or not really an illusion, but that's how it would feel to me.
Would it feel less like empathy and more like sympathy if it came from a woman? Empathy, I'm sitting with you in it.
Mm-hmm.
But like that, just hearing you talk, that's how I would receive it. Is like, I don't want you to feel bad for me.
Yeah.
And like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. I would feel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It would take me to a bad place.
Yeah. Yeah, I really resonated with that. So I think that's what it would be the hindrance for me, the barrier for that. Yeah. It might not be true.
True.
But that's how I would preconceive it in my head.
So what do you think, what do you think men need? Specifically to this topic.
Mm-hmm. A lot more resources. That's one. I think there needs to be more of a conversation about the male experience and how men would define it. Because I would imagine that it looks very different than it would for a female. Particularly if it's the male themselves that is dealing with the infertility. So I think we need to figure out how it impacts, how men define it, how it impacts different aspects of men's lives, and along with what kind of resources would be helpful to them, what platforms. Because some men might not want to go to therapy. They might feel more comfortable in a support group or an online group or something, or reading a blog post or whatever it might be. And so I think opening up the conversation to where men would most likely access support services like that is kind of a starting point.
Do you mind me asking you how you would define it?
Yeah. So I think I would define, again, kind of like what I was saying earlier, is just relentless shame, the unequivocal confusion, and just ferocious guilt that just pummels every aspect of my life. Because over the course of the last several years, I've seen it infiltrate different parts of my lives. And so I think that's how I would have defined it probably several years ago. And those things still exist today, and I still experience those a lot too. But I think now, again, like I was saying earlier, I think I'm at a place where I can interact with it a little bit differently. And the thing that seemed to cause me the most pain is now actually becoming like my superpower. Is going to enable me to love and support other people through this. So definition might have changed a little bit.
So how about this side? Help me out here. So how do I, as a friend, provide a space? How do I sit when my friend comes to me and tells me this? That's probably the part that I've always appreciated my talks with George, because we talk about the male experience a lot. We haven't necessarily covered this one yet, but it's the idea of like how we as males do not do well sitting in shitty situations, to be blunt. We don't do it. I think that's why we're so much around sports, beer, whatever, right? Like, oh, that sounds terrible, have another. Like, whatever you can do to, like, keep it out of the muck, right? Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, okay, we want this to be a change. We want this to be a revolution that's not wanted but needed. How do we, as friends, as other males, provide this space? Because we can't wait around for someone else to do it, because no one's done it, and that's why it hasn't existed yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what Anna was saying a couple weeks ago about asking the other person what they need. I think can be a good starting point. I don't think that question is more pertinent to male or female. Again, I think it's just a human question. So really starting there, I think for me, just having someone being willing to sit there and just listen has been the most impactful, and I would imagine would be really impactful for other men too. Because early on when I was first dealing with this, I got a lot of other people trying to fix it, and which was very counterproductive, because if I can't even fix it, and I'm the best problem fixer I know,
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
I know you ain't gonna fix it. And
How would they try to fix it? I'm curious, like, what that would look like.
yeah, so most often, and again, it was very like vague in general and no details, but sitting in church, they get the altar call if anybody wants prayer, so I'm like, you know what, I could probably use that. So I go up and and I can recall times, one time in particular where the speaker was a doctor, and he I don't know if he studied the brain or something like that, and so my senior pastor, who knew of the issue, told him, this is what is going on, can you pray for him? And so he said, yeah. So he started praying, and maybe 2 seconds into the prayer immediately jumped to, you're going to be a pastor, you're going to speak to all these people. And at the time I was like, oh, well, that's nice, but what do I, like, this still hurts. Like, like, what do I do with this? And it was just completely disregarded the grief and the pain that I had. And, and that kind of reinforced to me, is like, okay, well, I'm going to be a pastor, so I got to put that away.
Yeah.
And
it dismisses the pain, because it's like, well, I have to have this for my story to work as a pastor.
Right. There's a greater purpose. So let me dismiss that. And that's kind of what I went with. I'll just keep dismissing the pain and disregarding it. Doesn't exist, because there's a greater purpose to it. And sure, there might be a greater purpose to it, and I believe that there's a greater purpose to it. But that doesn't mean that the pain doesn't deserve to be acknowledged and looked at. And so I think sitting with somebody, acknowledging their experience, and just really listening to them, because again, it'll look different for every person. My experience is not going to cover 100% of this population. I think is one of the best things to do. You incorporate that into like physical activities or something, playing basketball, something like that. It's probably always a good thing too, because you're doing multiple things at once. So
you're doing the OG EMDR
while you're playing.
You
just follow the basketball.
You're always processing when you're running.
Yeah.
It's much cheaper that way too.
It is. That's true. Yeah.
So is there anything that you are currently working on to, I guess, provide more resources for men?
Yeah, so one thing is I'm trying to prepare myself with both healing in my own journey, because I think that's going to be important for me to really utilize this experience to reach out to other men. But I'm doing research to try to expand my knowledge on this area. And so what that's going to look like is hopefully next year when I begin dissertation, I hope to write on this topic and specifically interview people to just figure out how they would define their experience and what platforms they are most likely to access services. And then utilizing that to inform treatment and support services that are created. So those are probably two of the biggest things that I'm trying to do. There's ideas for just other support groups in private practice, doing the podcast to try to let people know like there is a place that they can come in lovely Brea, California.
There we go.
A bunch of good food spots. There's Chick-fil-A. Stop there every time after I have clients.
Well, we got a process.
Yeah, right.
Little fried carbs for everyone.
unless you get the
grilled chicken.
The grilled chicken.
Why would you go to?
But
But
yeah,
then
why
the
would you go to
the dollar,
Chick-fil-A?
right? The ice cream cone too, though.
That's
Chocolate chip cookies. Those are bomb. But
Which help fund
all
Chick-fil-A.
right. Sorry, we all process through foods. We're
Yeah.
emotional eaters.
We do. Yeah, so I mean, even this podcast was kind of part of that, to where you just get the word out and raise awareness, and you know, if this can let somebody know, like,
Yeah.
there is companionship on the road and on the path, and that they don't have to go through the journey alone, then that's really that's a success, and that's a win. Whether they come see me or they're even just begin to think about, you know, reaching out to somebody.
I mean, when you share your story, when you started going to therapy, sounds like in your story is a big moment.
Mm-hmm.
Big moment in your deliberate steps towards healing.
Yeah.
So, because men, we have to be spoon-fed this sometimes. What I'm hearing is, if you can't find that friend to talk to, if you don't have that safe place, create that safe place. Go get help.
Mm-hmm.
Plug in.
Yeah.
Was it hard? Well, I have a couple questions. One, did you specifically look for a therapist that had experience with infertility? And then my other question would be, was it easy for you to open up? Like, did you go in there saying, this is my presenting problem? Or was it kind of like, no, you know, it's other stuff, and then it came out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, initially I did look for people that said they specialize in infertility. I tried one out, and that didn't really work out, and then I just kind of put that away for a couple months. It's just like, okay, I can do this on my own.
Yeah.
Reverted back to that thinking.
Maybe alone's better.
Maybe alone's better.
The masculine way.
I've always done it this way.
Yeah.
Why change now? It's worked with
Yeah.
other stuff. Didn't work. Things were just crumbling, and I was like, yeah, this is not working. And so then it was more about, okay, who's in my kind of area, who looks friendly, all
Yeah.
of that. And
By their stock photo.
Yeah.
It's like plugged in today.
Right. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
look nice.
Yeah. They look cool. Yeah. So then I found somebody, and it was, I mean, so amazing that I found this particular therapist, because that's led me to get connected with other people in terms of like a pastor that I've been talking with, who's really helped with other issues. A podcast that I'm like in love with.
Oh, which one?
It's called The Desire Line.
Oh, okay.
So it's with a therapist and a pastor,
Oh,
and they
nice.
really
Wow.
acknowledge the integration of mental health and spirituality and faith. So it's really good. So yeah, totally glad that I went with this therapist. And so when I went in, I was like, okay, I'm going full force. I'm not going to hold back, even though my therapist will tell you, like, I'm the worst at doing homework. Like, I never do, like, the meditations. I never do the journaling. I'm supposed to email my therapist this week. We'll see if I actually do it. But I knew I really wanted to tackle this. And so I went in saying, this is what I'm struggling with. And even surprised myself at when she would give me homework, or we would talk about, maybe what if you share with one person, and then I would do it, and to both of our surprise that I would do it so quickly. So I really committed myself to being open to it, and for lack of a better phrase, not wasting time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hit the ground running with it.
Well, that's the George way.
Yeah.
That's why I'm sorry. I could sit over here and I bust up that you don't turn in your homework to your therapist, because I'm like, man, defense mechanism strong. Because if you know George was a dude that always had stuff done like week in advance with his damn checklist. Like, you never wanted to call George like the night of a quiz, because he'd be like, oh, I've been studying for blah, blah, blah. And you're like, shut up. Hang up, call someone else. Judy, okay, you're still panicked. All right.
That's true.
It was only sometimes.
Okay. Always.
I faked it pretty well.
There you go.
So how has it been for you, I don't know, the last hour, just talking about this openly?
You know, it's not what I expected. I did actually have to do like a lot of breathing in the car, like
breathing,
intentional breathing.
Yeah.
I felt like my heart rate speeding up, and you know, I have my paper here, which is not necessarily notes, but it's just my thoughts on paper, because I know this is a topic that still causes me a lot of grief, and it's still challenging, and it's ambiguous, and there's a lot of uncertainty regarding the future for me and my family, and not knowing what that's going to look like and how uncomfortable that feels made me feel really uncomfortable, and made me very nervous to talk about it, because again, in my head it's like, well, if it still hurts you, you don't talk about that, because it's not resolved yet. You know, it's almost like I want to have my thoughts like completed before I throw them out. I don't want to just brainstorm out loud. And that's what it kind of felt like as I was driving here. It's like, well, I'm still in the middle of it. But it's felt very freeing, and very supportive, in that supported here by friends, but more so supported that, again, that companionship on the path. And it doesn't matter if anybody else here has infertility or deals with infertility. You guys can still love and nourish me just as much, and speak into that grief, and speak life into those parts that hurt just as much. And so I feel very, very full and very delighted after sitting here, and I got to see Mochi.
I know.
Which is a
my
plus.
monster dog.
Yeah.
Who got your shoes
got
dirty?
my shoes all dirty.
And a little bit on your pants too.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's what you get here at SessionWell, guys. Is a slobbering French bulldog.
Yeah, you get attacked by a French bulldog.
Who Adam hates, by the way.
That is not true. Fred, you gotta help me out here. No.
True.
And he's shaking his head. Alright. It's not true. I love the dog from a distance. Anyways.
We're glad is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, that I actually did write down.
Good.
Perfect. I also, you're going to share your quotes, right? Because your quotes are pretty big.
Oh, my quotes. I kind of missed them earlier.
Well,
I mean, I can...
Let's
you
plug
can just
them
fit
in.
them in, yeah. Well, the one that I was thinking of was the Mike Tyson quote. You know, everybody's got a plan to get punched in the face or the mouth. And I think that was really a picture of what it felt like initially. To have that checklist and like, okay, I got this. I'll do this, this, and that. And like, wait, fertility doesn't work that way?
Yeah, you can't study for it. You can't
can't
lift
study
more
for
weights.
It.
Like,
Can't achieve enough productivity. None of that matters. Totally different. So yeah, and then the next quote that I had was actually from Martin Luther King Jr. Not sure if you guys heard of him. So
That's familiar.
Yeah,
kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal. I mean, he gets a whole day.
Yeah, exactly.
True. Which we appreciate when we get the day
pretty
off.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But he says that life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?
Wow.
And so when I was preparing for the likely possibility that you would ask what I would want to leave people with, the first thing that came to mind was really just to people in general, is really a plea and a call to helping professionals or otherwise, to be reminded that life is not meant to be done alone. And whether you're on the end of experiencing some painfully difficult experience, or you know somebody who is in that space, I wanted to give an encouragement and a challenge to notice those people, and you know, the people that are placed into your lives, because we can't reach everybody in the world, but the people that are specifically placed in your lives, and people that invite you in, to don't be afraid to go in and disrupt those parts of their lives, and speak life into them, because again, finding companionship on the road is one of the most healing things that people can do. And there's reciprocity in that. And so even if Adam or Judy, you guys are speaking into my painful moments, you guys can receive just as much from that as me. You know, and then the second was just to anybody, but males in particular who might be dealing with infertility. Infertility is not an issue that was meant to be done alone, and it can't be done alone.
Yeah.
And there are people that care, and so whether it's through Renovari or whether it's through another agency, to not be afraid to kind of reach out and get support that they need to become their full and most authentic selves, because they deserve to have the life that they kind of envision. And sometimes that means leaning on others and again letting them speak into those painful parts of their lives.
Well, I'm humbled, dude.
I know. I feel honored that you came and sat here and chatted with us.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been fun.
Well, is that it?
Yeah, I think that's it. Is there anything else we have to say in general?
Oh, yes, we do have something. Sorry, awkward segment.
Sorry, this is what happens when we're live.
This is 9 o'clock at night and being humbled by a good friend. So let's see here. All right. We do have something to talk about. I'm glad you're here because I think you can speak to it as well. So we had a comment that was left last week that I thought, let's talk about it. Hey guys, I've recently been accepted to an MFT program and I really appreciate the work you guys put out. There's not so much information about MFT as a profession on YouTube, and you guys do a great job. Could you guys maybe do a video about your experience picking a graduate program and your education/clinical experience in the program? Thank you. So we will definitely do that video.
Yes, and I'm going to just be honest, we are going to be probably really biased towards Hope International because all three of us went through there and we all kind of teach there and most of our guests are from there. So we will do lots of information on Hope, but we will also tap into other ones like Chapman, Alliant, all those different things.
So this person's name was JC. So yes, JC, we'll go through that.
And thank you for your question.
Thank you for your question. You have anything off the top of your head? Quick thing that you would tell them about picking a graduate school?
Yeah, I mean, I would say do your research. I looked at one school because I transferred from a seminary program into a clinical program.
Okay.
And I think really what drew me to Hope was my conversation with Daniela, who was my counselor at the time, and really made me feel like a person and not just another number, another check for tuition. And my experience after just really validated that.
Yeah.
Because even now, you know, Susan, who's like, she's like Gandalf of the program.
She's going to be on May 9th, by the way.
Oh, she is?
Yeah.
I might have to come and sit in.
If The Godfather had a matriarch, it's
Right.
Susan
Oh,
Hastings.
yeah.
Yes.
Like, you kiss the ring.
You kiss the ring. Yes. She's going to love that we said all of that.
I know exactly how her eyes are rolling right now.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's just second to none. It's top-notch education. And, you know, I've talked to people at other schools, you know, from Cal State Fullerton, Dominguez, even USC. And I still think the fact that the faculty loves on the students and realizes that, you know, there's more than just school life going on. Yes. And they speak into those different parts of a student's life to really empower them to become a full and whole clinician and a whole person. I think sets Hope apart by far. So. And
the fact that we're like on episode 24 of SessionWell, and like 22 out of the 24 episodes have been Hope people. It just it's an indicator of the fact that it just speaks volumes to the fact that we are a community and that was built out of Hope.
Yeah.
But we will cover other graduate programs as well.
Because I also will say this. This is where I'll cut it off on my end. Is that hope, definitely from an attachment standpoint, from everything, it spoke to a part of us, right?
Absolutely.
It nurtured something that we needed. I work with individuals that graduated from APU, UCLA, USC, just like you were listing. All of those programs spoke to specific pieces in those individuals. So my whole thing is go to wherever you go. That is where I want to go. And you might think, Adam, that's not it specific enough. But seriously, if you will allow yourself the space to go to a couple different ones, you'll be like, no, this is a place for me.
Yeah.
Because for me, I went to Chapman, I went to APU, I went to HIU, so Hope International, and I was really searching around, and I was looking at CBU, I was looking at Loma Linda, and what it really was just every time I talked to someone at Hope, it just worked. It spoke to something. I felt like I was going to be a part of something. I love the small size.
Yeah.
You might be different. Find something different. And you heard us talk about a lot of faith-based stuff, but doesn't mean that there's not amazing programs that come out of universities that are not faith-based. So,
but yes, we will definitely do a video on this as well. So thank you for your question.
Yes. Well, thank you guys for tagging along. If you've been listening on your car ride in, thank you so much. If you watch this live, even better. Drive safe. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.